فصل في الطهارة. الطهارة قسمان: طهارة حدث وطهارة خبث، ولا يصح الجميع إلا بالماء الطاهر المطهر. In this next section, Imam Al-Akhdari rahimahullah says that this is a chapter on purity. Purity or tahara in the Arabic language literally means nadafa or cleanliness. Its definition according to the Sharia is as follows. Purity is of two types: tahara. Taharatu hadathin. It's purity from those things which vitiate or break ritual purity. Hadath. This is the hadath. If a person breaks his wudu, then he's in a state of hadath. It's not something physically that's on his limbs or on his body if he's in the greater state of impurity, the state of janaba, but it's a state that's upon his limbs or upon his entire body that has to be removed. It has to be purified. So this is taharat we gain purity from two things: from those things which break the ritual purity, the hadath, and also the taharatu khabathin, the purity from the khabath or the najasa, those things deemed unclean by the sharia, or the filth, the impurities, the najasa. And those are things such as urine, blood, feces, pus, vomit that's been changed, portions of dead animals, unslaughtered animals. These are all examples of najasa. These things, if they're on the body or on the clothes of a person or on the area where a person is going to pray, they have to be removed. A person has to attain tahara from them. ولا يصح الجميع إلا بالماء الطاهر المطهر وهو الذي لم يتغير لونه أو طعمه أو رائحته بما يفارقه غالبا كالزيت والسمن والدسم كله والوذح والصابون والوسخ ونحوه. So when we again attain purity, it is only pure and purifying water. Pure water that is tahir and is purifying. It's mutahhir. It has the ability to purify, which can remove impurities. This is the water that's tahir, it's pure, and it's mutahhir. It's purifying. The definition is that it is water which has retained its original color, smell, and taste. So it has not been changed by anything. If the water has been changed in one of those three qualities, or two of them, or all of them, then it is no longer pure and purifying. So it is not changed due to things that are not normally part of it, such as oil, butter, grease, or such things as dung, soap, filth, and the like. Those things that he mentioned and other things like them are not normally part of water. Water in their natural state. Water that's taken from wells, from taps, from rivers, from oceans, rainwater. These things that he mentioned are not normally a part of water. So if they change the water in any of one of those three qualities, then it is no longer pure and purifying. It can no longer be used to attain purity. So if the water has a little bit of milk in it, or it has a little bit of soap in it, or it has a little bit of oil in it, then this water is no longer pure and purifying. It could be pure in the sense that you can use it for cooking and cleaning, but it's not purifying. So if water gets soap in it, then it is no longer purifying, but it could be pure. And so you could use it for washing clothes, for washing dishes, or so forth, but you cannot use it for attaining purity. There is no harm ولا بأس بالتراب والحمأة والسبخة والآجر والخزي ونحوه. There is no harm in such things as dirt, clay, salt marsh, baked brick, and the like. These things that he mentioned are things that are normally a part of water, or are constituents of the earth, and so for that reason, if they change one of the qualities of the water, they do not harm it. So if you have water, rainwater that comes down onto the ground and is now changed because of the earth, it has now a sandy color or a taste, then that's not harmed, because this is a thing that is naturally part of the water, so it does not harm the water. Or you have salty water. Salt is a natural thing that's natural could be a natural part of water, so it does not harm it. Or you go to a well that has minerals that causes it to have a yellowish tint or a reddish tint, or to have some sort of a smell because of the minerals, then those things, because they're naturally a part of the water, they do not harm the state of the water. So even if it changes as one or all of the qualities of the water, it does not harm it. So that water is still pure and purifying. فصل في النجاسة إذا تعينت النجاسة غسل محلها فإن التبست غسل الثوب كله ومن شك في إصابة النجاسة نضح وإن أصابه شيء شك في نجاسته فلا نضح عليه. This is the chapter on impurity. If impurity, those things that were mentioned earlier, blood, feces, urine, pus, so forth, if impurity is discovered on one's body or garment, then the place should be washed, just that place. But if it is hard to identify, then the entire garment should be washed. So if you know that that impurity got in a specific portion of your body or clothes, then all you have to do is wash that area. But if it is hard to identify, meaning that you know that this impurity got onto your body or onto your clothes, but you don't know exactly where, then you wash the entire garment, or you wash an area large enough to where you know that you have now cleaned this garment. And this washing means that you put it on the water that's tahir and mutahhir, the pure and purifying water, and you put it on the area and you allow the water to flow off. Or you know that the water, once it's poured on that garment, it's now diluted that thing to where there's no longer any traces of that impurity. So if you have blood on the garment, for example, or any other impurity, and now you wash it off, as long as the water that's being poured on is coming off with a change in it because of that impurity, it's changed in its color or its smell, then that garment is not purified. You have to keep pouring water and washing that area until the water that's coming off no longer has any traces of that impurity. So if you can do that without wringing, that's fine. There's no, it is not necessary to wring out the clothes. If you can just pour water on the clothes, then you know that there's no traces of that impurity, that now you've diluted that impurity to where it's no longer can be, it no longer changes the water at all. Then that cloth is purified. You don't have to wring it out. You can pour water on it, or you could put it in a bucket of water or a tub of water and then hang it out to dry. وَمَنْ شَكَّ فِي إِصَابَةِ النَّجَاسَةِ نَضَحَ. As for one who doubts whether impurity has soiled him or not, then he should spray water over it. If you know that there's an impurity in the area, and you see it kind of splash, or you see it, your clothes may or may not have touched it, so you know there's an impurity in the area, but you doubt whether or not it actually got onto you, then all you must do is just lightly sprinkle water over that area. Should he doubt whether the substance is actually impure or not, then he need not sprinkle over it. So if a person finds something on his clothes and does not know what it is, he knows definitely it's on his clothes or on his body, but he doesn't know what it is. He sees something red, he doesn't know, is this ink or is this blood? He sees something brown, he doesn't know, is this feces or is this mud? Or he sees something wet on his body, he doesn't know, is this urine or is this water? So he doubts whether the material is actually impure or pure. In this case, he does not wash it, sprinkle it, or do anything to it. He leaves it alone, because the origin of all things are pure until it's proven that they're impure. So the impurity on the body, to recap this section, the impurity can either be one of four things. It either got onto your body and you know exactly where it was. It got onto your body, but you don't know where it got on. You doubt whether or not it got onto your body. Or you know it got onto your body, but you don't know what it is. So in the first situation, you know what it is, and you know where it got onto your body, you wash that particular area. You know what it is, and you know it got onto your body, but you don't know where, then you wash the entire garment, or you wash an area large enough so that you have that no doubt remains about that matter still being on your body. Or you know that this matter is impure, but you doubt whether it got onto you or not. You sprinkle that area. And then the fourth situation, you know it's on your body or on your clothes, but you don't know what it is. So in that case, you leave it alone. وَمَنْ تَذَكَّرَ النَّجَاسَةَ وَهُوَ فِي الصَّلَاةِ قَطَعَ إِلَّا يَخَافَ خُرُوجُ الْوَقْتِ. So in these four instances, you could either remember it before the prayer, during the prayer, or after the prayer. If you remember it before the prayer, then you have to wash it off. And if a person goes ahead and prays, then his prayer is invalid because he's now prayed with an impurity on him. If he goes into the prayer forgetting that this thing is on him, or not knowing, and then during the prayer he realizes that this impurity is on his body or on his clothes, then he has to cut the prayer off, go wash that thing off, and then begin the prayer from the beginning, unless he fears that by doing that he's going to lose the time of the prayer. So say, for example, it's morning time, the sun's just about to come up, you're about to finish your prayer, and you remember that you have some impurities on your clothes, and you know that you do not have enough time to go wash your clothes or find some other clothes and then come back and complete this prayer, start this prayer and complete it before the sun comes up or before the time of any of the prayers goes out, then you continue on your prayer. So if someone is praying and he recalls an impurity on him, then he should break his prayer unless he fears missing the prayer in its proper time, in which case he would continue on praying with that impurity on him. And this is because the prayer's time is so important. It is given precedence over the removal of impurities from the body or from the clothes. ومن صلى بها ناسيا وتذكر بعد السلام أعاد في الوقت. We discussed if he remembers the najasa before the prayer, then during the prayer. And now Imam Al-Akhdari rahimahullah says, as for one who prays with an impurity due to forgetfulness, then recalls the impurity after the salam, after completing the prayer, he should repeat the prayer if there is still time. So he did not remember the najasa before the prayer or during the prayer, but now after the prayer he realizes that he prayed with najasa. For him, his prayer is correct, but if there's still time, then he should repeat his prayer. And when it says he should repeat his prayer, it means that it is recommended to repeat his prayer. His prayer is valid. It is not incumbent for him to repeat his prayer, but it is recommended for him to repeat it if there's still time. Now, if the time of that particular prayer has gone out, then it is not incumbent nor recommended for him to repeat that prayer. فصل فرائض الوضوء سبعة النية وغسل الوجه وغسل اليدين إلى المرفقين ومسح الرأس وغسل الرجلين إلى الكعبين والدلك والفور. The obligations of wudu are 7. The first is intention. And this intention is either one of 3 things. فلينوي رفع حدث أو مفترض. So he should intend the removal of the impurity. He either intends that he's in a state of hadith and he wants to remove himself from this hadith. He wants to remove this hadith from his body. So he intends by doing this wudu that he's removing this hadith. This is one of the intentions, the 3 intentions that he can have. Or he intends the obligation. Or he intends that because the prayer is an obligation and the wudu is a condition of the prayer, that makes the wudu now an obligation, so he intends that this wudu is obligatory upon him, so he's doing it. So that's another one of the intentions that he can have. Or the third, أو استباحة لممنوع عرض, or he makes the intention of permitting the impermissible, which means if something was impermissible for him when he was not in wudu, like touching the mushaf, touching the Quran, or doing tawaf of the house, going around the house, then he says, I want to put myself in a state of wudu, so those things now become permissible for me. So that's the third of the 3 intentions that he has to have, or that he can have for this wudu. He can do any one of the 3, he can do 2, and it's best to do all 3. And if he does the intention of wudu for one of the things, it makes the others permissible. So if he does wudu to pray dhuhr, it's permissible for him to touch the mushaf with that wudu. Or if he makes wudu to touch the mushaf and a prayer time comes along, then it's permissible for him to pray that prayer with the wudu that he did to touch the mushaf. So these 3 intentions are interchangeable. But if he does not have an intention for the wudu, then his wudu is not valid because of the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Verily, actions are by their intentions. So if a person goes and just washes up for the intention of cleanliness and does not make present the intention that he's actually doing this as an act of worship, then he's wetting his limbs, he's washing them, but it's not considered a wudu. Or if somebody jumps in a pool or a pond, gets all his limbs wet and rubs them, but he does not have the intention, then this is not a wudu. he has to have the intention. وَغَسْلُ الْوَجْهِ. Also, the second obligation of the wudu is that he washes his face. And the definition of the face is from the natural hairline down to the chin, the entire chin bone. Now, if a person has receding hairlines, he only goes to where the hair naturally would have began if there was hair there. So he begins from that in the top down to his chin, including the entire jawbone, but not underneath not the neck and not underneath the chin. Just down to the jawbone and including a little portion of the bone from underneath, but not the entire area underneath the jaw. Then from side to side, it's from the little area of the cartilage that if it were, which is called in Arabic the watid, if it were to be pressed in, it would close up the air canal from that to the other side. That is the watid, that little area of cartilage. If it's not actually considered part of the face, but a portion of it has to be washed for the wudu to be complete. So that's the entire face. Then he should also make sure to wash his lips, and that's if he says the letter mim, when he finishes it, what is shown has to be washed. So if he says mim, that area of the lips that is shown has to be washed. Also underneath the nose, it should be a person should make sure to wash underneath the nose, and so forth. وَغَسْلُ الْيَدَيْنِ إِلَى الْمِرْفَقَيْنِ. Washing the two arms up to and including the elbows is the third obligation of the wudu. So he has to wash the hands, getting in between the fingers, getting in between the wrinkles on the knuckles, up to and including the elbows. وَمَسْحُ الرَّأْسِ. Then also wiping the head is an obligation of the wudu. And the head or the skull is defined from just below the temple, there's a protruding bone. From that bone, with the bone, the bone that's felt behind the ear, all the way back down to the nape of the neck. That entire area of the head must be wiped. وَغَسْلُ الرِّجْلَيْنِ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ. Washing the 2 feet up to and including the ankles is the 5th obligation. وَالدَّلْكُ. Rubbing the parts that are washed. So not only are these parts that we mentioned, they have to have water upon them, and they also have to be rubbed. So if a person merely pours water on these limbs, that's not considered a washing. They actually have to be rubbing. And the rubbing is not something very light or something very hard. It's just a light rubbing of the limbs so that the washing is complete. وَالْفَوْرُ. And then also continuity during the actual act of wudu. So a person cannot do half the wudu now and then half later, or in the middle of the wudu he begins something else and he completes his wudu an hour later or half an hour later. He has to complete the entire act of wudu in the same sitting. And if he delays, if he allows a delay to come in his wudu, a long delay, then he has to start all over. And that delay is defined as what would dry the limbs in moderate conditions. So if a person does wudu, and in the midst of it, he stops to talk to somebody or to answer the phone or whatever it may be, and now a long time has passed, and that time that has passed is enough time that would normally dry the limbs in normal conditions, then his wudu is invalid. So when we say drying the limbs in normal conditions, we don't look at an extremely cold climate or a hot climate, because in a cold climate, the limbs are going to dry. It's going to take a long time for them to dry. And in a hot climate, they're going to dry very fast. So we look at just normal conditions in a normal area on a normal person. He's not inside in a closed-in area. He's not on the top of a mountain where there's a lot of wind. He's not enclosed by trees or by walls. He's just in an area that's normal elevation, normal conditions. How long would it take for his limbs to dry? That's the time that a person is allowed to give it as a space within his wudu. If it goes more than that, then he has to start the wudu from the beginning. وسننه غسل اليدين إلى الكوعين عند الشروع والمضمضة والاستنشاق والاستنثار ورد مسح الرأس ومسح الأذنين وتجديد الماء لهما والترتيب بين الفرائض. The author rahimahullah then goes on to the section of sunnahs of wudu. The sunnahs of wudu are 8 in number. The first one is washing the hands up to the wrists at the beginning. So the beginning of the wudu, washing the wrists. Then rinsing the mouth. Also rinsing the mouth lightly, bringing water up to the mouth with the right hand, and then rinsing it out lightly and spitting it out lightly without making a sound in either the rinsing or the spitting is a sunnah. If a person rinses very much and makes a sound or gargles, that's considered makruh. It's disliked because it's being excessive. And then if they make sounds, it's makruh, just as making sounds while eating is considered makruh or disliked. وَالْمَضْمَضَةُ وَالْإِسْتِنْشَاقُ. Istinshaq, which is lightly sniffing water up the nostrils. So to take water with the right hand and then lightly sniff water up into the nose, not sniffing very hard because that would harm the nose, or doing it very lightly and not actually getting any water in the nose. He just does it lightly, sniffing water into the nose. And then istintharu, which is lightly blowing the water out the nostrils. He doesn't do it very heavily to where he's like cleaning out his nostrils very heavily. That's also considered disliked. And the hadith said of the Prophet ﷺ says not to do that because it's like a donkey sneezing. So he lightly blows water out of the nostrils. وَرَدُّ مَسْحِ الرَّأْسِ. Also a return wipe of the head. Because the first wipe of the head was mentioned in the obligations. And the return wipe is considered a sunnah. Then the renewing the water for then wiping the 2 ears, وَمَسْحُ الْأُذْنَيْن, is also considered a sunnah. And renewing the water for the wiping of the ears, which is a separate sunnah. So after a person wipes his head and return wipes his head, if there's still water on his hands, he can go ahead and wipe the ears and attain one sunnah. But if he renews water for the wiping of the ears, he has now attained a second sunnah. And there's actually a third sunnah that's not mentioned in the text, but it's that he takes his index finger and lightly sticks it into the ear canals while wiping the ear. And only lightly, because doing more than that would harm the ear. And the wudu is not there to harm the person's body. It's actually there to benefit him spiritually and physically. Then the next sunnah that he mentions is following the order given for the obligations, i.e. face first, then arms, then head. So the obligations of the wudu that were mentioned in the previous section, the obligatory limbs that have to be washed, the arms, the face, the arms, the head, and the feet, were mentioned in that order by Allah in the Quran. In the Quran it says, if you go to the prayer, then wash your face and your arms, wipe your head, and then wash your feet. So to follow that order is considered sunnah. If somebody does not follow that order, it does not invalidate the wudu, but it is makruh, it is disliked to go against that order. And all of these sunnahs are like that, in that if a person leaves a sunnah, it does not invalidate his wudu, but it is makruh, it's disliked, because it's something that the Prophet ﷺ did constantly, and he never left, but there was not a proof that would cause this to be considered an obligation. So that's the definition of a sunnah. A sunnah, in its hukm, in a general sense, everything that the Prophet ﷺ did was a sunnah. That was his way. But the ulama then take his actions or his deeds and then categorize them. It might be an obligation, it might be a sunnah, it might be mustahab, recommended, and so forth. So if he did something and there's a proof that it's an obligation, then it's a fard or a wajib. If he did something constantly, never leaving it, but there was not a proof that this was an obligation, then it's given the hukm of sunnah. If he did something, but sometimes would leave it, then it's given the hukm of mandub or mustahab, which is in the next section. Then he says, وَمَنْ نَسِيَ فَرْضًا مِنْ أَعْضَائِهِ فَإِنْ تَذَكَّرَهُ بِالْقُرْبِ فَعَلَهُ وَمَا بَعْدَهُ وَإِنْ طَالَ فَعَلَهُ وَحْدَهُ وَأَعَادَ مَا صَلَّى قَبْلَهُ. If one forgets an obligation of wudu and recalls it shortly thereafter, then he should return to it and repeat what follows. So if a person is in the midst of wudu and he forgets having performed an obligation, he has to go back to that thing, that obligatory limb, wash it, and then it's sunnah for him to wash what's after it. If he does not do that, if he just goes back to the limb he missed and then goes back to where he left off, then it's going to cause him to have performed the wudu out of the order that it should have been performed in. For example, if a person's washing his feet and he forgets washing his face, then he should go back, wash his face, and then perform what's after it. If he does not do that, if he's on his left foot and he goes back to his face and then he comes back and completes his left foot, then he has now performed the wudu out of its proper order. He has done the feet, he has washed the feet before washing the face. And he says, recall it shortly thereafter. Meaning if he forgets this obligation, if he remembers this obligation within the wudu, if time elapsed, then he should go back and perform only what was forgotten and repeat what prayers he performed with that wudu. وَإِن طَالَ فَعَلُهُ وَحْدَهُ وَأَعَادَ مَا صَلَّى قَبْلَهُ. So he just mentioned that if a person remembered that missed obligation within the wudu, or shortly after wudu, meaning a time had not passed long enough to dry the limbs, meaning a long time had passed. So if a long time has passed, then he should go back and perform only what was forgotten and repeat what prayers he had performed with that wudu. So if he had performed the wudu and forgot one of the obligations and did not remember that obligation until a long time had passed, an hour later or half an hour later, the important thing is that a time passed long enough that would dry the limbs in normal conditions, then that's considered a long time, and he only goes back and fulfills that one obligation, and he doesn't do what's after it, but he has to repeat any prayers that he had prayed with that wudu because it's a deficient wudu. وَإِن تَرَكَ سُنَّةً فَعَلَهَا وَلَا يُعِيدُ الصَّلَاةَ. Should he leave off a sunnah from the prayer, then he need only fulfill it without repeating the prayers done with that wudu. So if after doing the wudu, a time passes, and then he remembers that he did not fulfill one of the sunnahs, then he should go back and fulfill that sunnah. But if he had prayed any prayers with that, then he does not need to repeat that prayer, because leaving a sunnah from the wudu does not invalidate the wudu. وَمَنْ نَسِيَ لُمْعَةً غَسَلَهَا وَحْدَهَا بِنِيَّةٍ وَإِنْ صَلَّى قَبْلَ ذَلِكَ أَعَادَ. Should one forget only a portion of a limb or a part of the face, he need only wash the part in question, but with intention. This is what is called the lum'ah. The lum'ah is a portion of the limb that was not washed, or there was something on the limb that prevented water from getting to the limb, prevented that portion from getting washed, such as a piece of tape, a piece of food that dried, some paint or something that was on the skin and the water did not penetrate it and he was not able to wash that area. If he notices that after fulfilling the wudu, then he does not have to complete his entire wudu or even wash that entire limb. What he merely does is wash that one area after removing that thing that prevented the water from getting there, or wash the area that he forgot to wash, and then repeat any prayers he performed with that wudu, because again, it's deficient. ومن تذكر المضمضة والاستنشاق بعد أن شرع في الوجه فلا يرجع إليهما حتى يتم وضوءه. Should one recall that he has not washed his hands at the onset or cleaned his nostrils, and yet he has begun to wash his face, he should not return to either of them until he has completed his wudu. So, if a person leaves off one of the sunnahs, like washing the hands or cleaning the nostrils, and then goes to the obligation that follows it. So, you wash the hands, which is a sunnah, wash the mouth, which is a sunnah, clean the nostrils, and then do a fard, which is washing the face. But say a person forgets to rinse the mouth and the nose, and then goes to straight to washing his face. So now he has skipped a sunnah, he forgot to do a sunnah, and he went to an obligation. He says that he should not return to that sunnah until he has completed his entire wudu. And this is because he has overlooked the sunnah and went to an obligation. And the principle is that you do not leave an obligation to go back to the sunnah. So he completes his face and actually completes his entire wudu. And then once the wudu is completed, then he does that sunnah that he missed. And this in this is a lesson that we do not leave an obligation for a sunnah wherever it may be, because a sunnah is not an obligation. Leaving a sunnah would be disliked, but it's not a sin, whereas leaving an obligation is a sin. And this is just to teach us that principle. Whereas if he if he washed his face, began washing his face, and went back to washing the mouth, he should have delayed that missed sunnah until the wudu was over. فضائل الوضوء وفضائله التسمية والسواك والزائد على الغسلة الأولى في الوجه واليدين. The virtues of the wudu are 8. The virtues known as the fada'il, sometimes called the mustahab or the mandub, these are all words that mean the same thing. In this category, it's things that the Prophet ﷺ used to do, but sometimes he would leave them. So we said the obligations are things that he would always do, and there's a proof that it's an obligation. Sunnahs, things that are given the hukum of sunnah, is that it's something that he would do often, and he would never leave, but there wasn't a proof to show that it's an obligation. The fada'il are things that he would do often, but sometimes he would leave. And so they're given the hukum of fadila, or mandub, or mustahab. He says here, the fada'il are 8, and there's actually other scholars mention even more, and in some texts it goes up to 30. But here he mentions some of them, some of the recommended acts, the stronger recommended acts. And the first one is a tasmiyatu, saying Bismillah at the beginning. So before, once washing the right hand, a person would say Bismillah. Also the siwak, brushing the teeth before the wudu. Brushing the teeth either with a toothstick, the miswak that's made from the root of the arak tree or the branch of a tree that's known, such as the zaytun tree, the olive tree, or a date palm tree. A person would clean his teeth. Or if he can't find something like that, he can use something even like the plastic toothbrushes that are commonly used. The best thing would, though, be to use the siwak, because that's the sunnah. But the important thing is to clean the mouth. So even if he takes a piece of cloth and cleans his teeth, that fulfills this recommendation. وَالزَّائِدُ عَلَى الْغَسْلَةِ الْأُولَى فِي الْوَجْهِ وَالْيَدَيْنِ. Washing the face and hands more than once. So washing the hands in the wudu would be the obligation the first time. Then the second and the third time would each be a recommended act. Washing the face the first time is an obligation the first time. Then the second and the third are recommended. So every time where there's a second and a third washing, it's recommended. وَالْبِدَايَةُ بِمُقَدَّمِ الرَّأْسِ. Beginning with the front of the forehead. So when a person washes their face, they don't start with their cheeks or their chin. They start with the top of their face, their forehead, and then go down. And the same thing goes for the hands. You start with the tips of the fingers and then go down towards the elbows. When washing the feet, you start with the front portion of the feet, the toes, and then wash the other portion. وَتَرْتِيبُ السُّنَنِ. Then also following the order of the sunnahs. So the sunnahs that were mentioned in the previous section were given in a certain order. So to keep them in that order is recommended. So we learned that keeping the obligations of the wudu, keeping them in order is a sunnah. Then keeping the sunnahs in order is recommended. And then another recommendation is keeping the sunnahs in order with the obligation. So you have sometimes a sunnah, then an obligation, then a sunnah, then an obligation. So washing the hands, you have a sunnah, rinsing the mouth, sunnah, rinsing the nose, cleaning the nose, sunnah, and then the face, fard, and then so on. وَتَقْدِيمُ الْيُمْنَى عَلَى الْيُسْرَى. Also recommended is giving precedence to the right limbs over the left. So doing the right hand before the left, doing the right arm before the left, doing the right foot before the left. وَيَجِبُ تَخْلِيلُ أَصَابِعِ الْيَدَيْنِ. Also necessary is to wash between the fingers. So when washing the hands in the obligatory wash, a person has to rub in between the fingers. And they would do that by interlacing the fingers. And it's done from the top. So you would take, when washing the right hand, you would take the left hand and put the palm on the back of the right hand, and then run the fingers, interlace them, and then wash in between them. And then the same for when washing the left hand, with the right hand on top, and then interlacing them and rubbing in between the fingers. This is incumbent because when you wash the hands, we said that one of the obligations is rubbing. And if you merely just wash the hands without paying attention and rubbing in between the fingers, then you're not rubbing in between the fingers. So maybe water is getting in between the fingers, but they're not being rubbed. And so, because rubbing is one of the obligations of wudu, you would have to interlace the fingers and rub in between the fingers. وَيُسْتَحَبُّ فِي أَصَابِعِ الرَّجْلَيْنِ. Whereas it is only a virtue concerning the toes. So, when washing the feet, to actually rub in between the toes is recommended. A person would have to get water in between the toes, but if they do not rub in between the toes, it does not invalidate their wudu. But it is recommended for them to rub in between the toes. ويجب تخليل اللحية الخفيفة في الوضوء دون الكثيفة ويجب تخليلها في الغسل ولو كانت كثيفة. As for the beard, if it is thick, it is enough to wipe over it. But should the underlying skin be discernible, then one must rub until the water reaches the skin. So here in the text, the author says that refers to the beard specifically, but this also includes any of the facial hair. So the eyebrows, the mustache, and the beard. The mustache and the beard, of course, being for the men, and the eyebrows for both the men and the women. If it is thick, it's enough to wipe over it. So if a person at first glance were to look at somebody's facial hair and they cannot see the underlying skin, then that's considered thick. And so what you do not have to get water down to the skin. You would just wipe over it and lightly run the fingers through that hair. Run the fingers through the beard or through the mustache or through the eyebrows. Whereas if the underlying skin can be discernible, and that's defined as if a person were to look at them, at first glance they can see the skin, then it is not enough to wipe over that facial hair. Water actually has to get down to the skin. As for ghusl, it is the same whether it is light or thick. One must wash the underlying skin. So the beard as well as the other facial hair, during the ghusl, during the full body wash, a person has to wash and get water down to the skin even if it's thick. فصل نواقض الوضوء أحداث وأسباب فالأحداث البول والغائط والريح والمذي والودي والأسباب النوم الثقيل والإغماء والسكر والجنون والقبلة ولمس المرأة إن قصد اللذة أو وجدها ومس الذكر بباطن الكف أو بباطن الأصابع. This is the section on the things that nullify wudu. They are both events, they are either events or reasons. Those things which nullify wudu are either events, ahdath, and these are things that nullify the wudu in and of themselves, or possible reasons for the events, asbab al-ahdath, things that would allow a hadath to occur. As for the events, as for the hadath, they are the following: al-bawlu, urine; al-gha'itu, feces. So these are things that break the wudu, and they're considered hadaths or events. And in Arabic, you see it's called gha'it, and this is taken from the in the Arabic word gha'it literally means a low-lying place in the earth, a depression in the land. Because the Arabs would say, if a person went to use the bathroom, he would say ذهب إلى الغائط. He went to the low-lying land. In other words, he went to a place in the land where he cannot be seen. It's a depression in the land, and he relieved himself there. So they would not specifically say that what he did there, but they would say he went to that place. So again, like we were mentioning in the first section of Al-Akhdari, about talking about things in a dignified manner, this is one of the way the Arabs would refer to something in a dignified manner, meaning the going to the restroom. They would say ذهب إلى الغائط. They went to the low-lying place. So the gha'it is feces, it's a hadath, and it breaks the wudu. Rih, wind, it's a hadath, and it breaks the wudu. Madhu is lusty fluid, and it breaks the wudu. And he's going to define later in this section exactly what is the madhi. It's a fluid that comes out after lustful thinking, touching, or looking. Wadu is prostatic fluid without lust, and it's a thick whitish fluid that comes out usually after urine, and it could be caused by lifting heavy objects, and a person urinates, it would come out after that. So the wadu is a thick whitish fluid that comes out usually after urination. So the urine has already broken the wudu, but the fuqaha mentioned that the wadi, they mentioned that it breaks the wudu because if there's a case where it comes out by itself, then the person would know that it breaks the wudu. The madyu that was just previously mentioned, it's a clear fluid, whereas the wadyu is thick and it's white. Then Imam Al-Akhdari mentions the asbab, and these are the possible reasons, things that if they occur, it could allow an event to happen. So for that reason, it actually breaks the wudu. The first is a nawmu thaqilu, deep sleep. So if a person experiences deep sleep, that breaks his wudu. And the definition of deep sleep is that he's in a sleep that's deep enough to where if there were people talking around him, he no longer hears them. The voices or sounds around him are cut off from him. Or if he's holding something in his hand like a pin or a subha, a prayer beads or a book, it drops out of his hand and he does not feel that it dropped. Whereas if it were to drop out of his hand and he realized that it dropped, then this would be light sleep. So if he did not notice that thing dropping out of his hand, then it's considered deep sleep. Or if a person calls his name and on the first time they call him in a regular voice, he does not respond. That's deep sleep. Light sleep would not break the wudu. And that's where he would still hear voices. If somebody called his name on the first time, he would respond. If he dropped something out of his hand, he would realize that it dropped, and so forth. وَالْإِغْمَاءُ, loss of consciousness is a sabab, and it breaks the wudu. And it's either because a person became sick, they fainted, they were hit on the head, or whatever caused them to lose consciousness, that would break their wudu. وَالسُّكْرُ, also intoxication. If a person becomes intoxicated, then that would break their wudu. وَالْجُنُونُ, insanity also breaks the wudu, and it's a sabab. وَالْقُبْلَةُ, also kissing breaks the wudu, and this is if it is lips to lips from a person who pleasure is normally derived from. So, for example, between a man and his wife. If they kiss lips to lips, even if there was no pleasure intended or experienced, that would break the wudu. Whereas if a person kissed his daughter, or a person kissed their mother, these are not people that pleasure is normally derived from. So even if the kiss was lips to lips, that does not break the wudu. So the qubla in Arabic is specifically if it is a kiss lips to lips. If it's a kiss from on the cheek, then that goes under the category of lems, which is the next thing that he mentions. وَلَمْسُ الْمَرْأَةِ إِنْ قَصَدَ اللَّذَّةَ أَوْ وَجَدَهَا. Lustful touching if pleasure was intended or derived. So if a man touches another woman, regardless of whether it was halal or haram for him to touch, if he touched his wife, it was halal for him to touch, or if he touched a woman that was not his wife, and he derived pleasure, or he intended pleasure, then that would break his wudu. So if a person touches another person who pleasure is normally derived from, like in the case of a man to a woman or vice versa, and they intend or they derive pleasure, then that would break their wudu. If they intended pleasure, whether or not they experienced pleasure, it breaks the wudu. And if they did not intend pleasure, then it would only break their wudu if they did experience pleasure. So there's four conditions. There's four states. Either he intended pleasure and he found it, breaks the wudu. He intended pleasure and he did not find it, it breaks the wudu. He did not intend pleasure and he found it, that breaks the wudu. He did not intend pleasure and he did not find it. That's the only situation where it would not break the wudu. And the situations where he does not intend pleasure, that's like if a man and a wife, they hand something to each other, or a person's in a marketplace and somebody just brushes up against them. They did not intend pleasure. So it would only break their wudu if they experienced pleasure. وَمَسُ الذَّكْرِ بِبَاطِنِ الْكَفِّ أَوْ بِبَاطِنِ الْأَصَابِعِ. Also for a male, touching the private part with the palm or the inner part of the fingers or the sides. So for a man, if he touches his private part directly with either the bottom of the palm, the sides of the palm, the bottom or the sides of the fingers, that would break his wudu. Whereas if he touched his private part with any other part of his hand, the top of his hand or his arm, that would not break the wudu. And it would also not break the wudu if he touched his private part over clothing. So it has to be direct contact with the bottom or the sides of the palms and the bottom or the sides of the fingers. ومن شك في حدث وجب عليه الوضوء إلا أن يكون موسوسا فلا شيء عليه. As for the one who doubts whether an event occurred or not, this necessitates wudu. So if a person does wudu and then later on he doubts whether it was broken or not, this necessitates wudu because the doubt would require him to do wudu. Whereas if a person doubted whether he broke his wudu or not, and then later on he regains certainty about having wudu, then he does not have to break the wudu. Unless this person has constant doubt, he's muwaswas, in that case he should ignore the doubt. So if a person is getting doubt about his wudu every day, even if it's only once a day, but consecutively, then he leaves this doubt. So if he has doubt one day, if he has doubt only once, then he would follow it up and do the wudu. But if now he gets it the second day he considers it waswasa, he considers it whisperings, and he leaves it. And then after that, if it keeps coming, he leaves it. So if it's coming consecutively, even if it's only once a day, he would not follow it up. And this is incumbent for him to leave the waswasa because it's from the shaitan, and it's actually could harm the person if he keeps following it up. Because what the shaitan wants to do is get to the aqidah of a person. He wants to get to the creed of a Muslim. And he knows that he can't go to the creed directly. So he has to work his way up. So the first place he goes is to the tahara of a person, to the cleanliness. He'll give them whisperings about cleaning themselves. Cleaning the najasa off themselves after using the restroom. He'll give them waswasa about their wudu. He'll give them waswasa about their prayer. So whenever he experiences waswasa, he has to leave it. It's incumbent for him to leave it. And that's the strongest medicine to remove waswasa, to remove whisperings from a person. It is also necessary to wash the entire private part from lusty emission, but he need not wash the testicles. ويجب عليه غسل الذكر كله من المذي ولا يغسل الأنثيين والمذي هو الماء الخارج عند الشهوة الصغرى بتفكر أو نظر أو غيره. So it is necessary to wash the entire private part after experiencing lusty emission, the medhi, but he need not wash the testicles. So he has to, after experiencing medhi, and he'll define exactly what it is, the male has to wash the entire private part, but he does not wash the testicles. The definition of lusty emission, or medhi, is a fluid that is emitted when one finds minor sexual pleasure, either from lusty thoughts, gaze, or other means. And it's a clear fluid that comes out after these things. فصل لا يحل لغير المتوضئ صلاة ولا طواف ولا مس نسخة القرآن العظيم ولا جلدها لا بيده ولا بعود ونحوه إلا الجزء منها المتعلم فيه ولا مس لوح القرآن العظيم على غير الوضوء إلا لمتعلم فيه أو معلم يصححه. This is the section on things prohibited for the one without wudu. It is not permissible for someone who is not in wudu to pray, perform circumambulation around the Kaaba, tawaf, to touch a copy of the exalted Quran, even its cover, neither with one's hand or stick or other means, unless it is a small portion that one is learning from. So it is not permissible for a person who is not in wudu to pray. It's haram for a person to perform a prayer if he does not have wudu. It is also haram to perform tawaf around the Kaaba if a person does not have wudu, because one of the conditions of tawaf is that they must be in a state of wudu. Because the Prophet ﷺ said that the tawaf is like the prayer, except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed us to speak during it. So a person during tawaf has to cover their nakedness, has to be free from impurities, and has to have wudu. It is also prohibited for the one without wudu to touch a copy of the exalted Quran, the mushaf, even its cover, neither with one's hand or stick. So if a person does not have wudu, it is not permissible for them to touch the Quran, the mushaf, and this is specifically a copy of the Quran with only Arabic. if it has a commentary of the Quran either in English or Arabic, because what they call a translation of the Quran is really a translation of its meanings, and so it is considered a commentary or a tafsir. So if it is a tafsir of the Quran, even if it contains the entire Quran, like the tafsir of the Jalalain, or like a entire translated copy into the English or Spanish language, then that's considered a tafsir, and it's permissible to touch it without wudu. The best thing, though, would be to have wudu while touching it, because there is a difference of opinion amongst the scholars. So it is recommended to get out of the difference of opinion by not doing that. But it is permissible for that person to touch a copy of a tafsir without wudu. The only thing that is haram for him to touch is a copy of the Quran and Mus'haf if it is strictly in the Arabic language. And it's also not permissible to touch even its cover. So not only is it prohibited to touch the actual words that are written in the Quran, but even its cover, both with his hand or even with a stick, to carry it with a stick or to move it, to use something like a pencil to move the Mus'haf out of the way, would be considered prohibited. Unless it is a small portion that one is learning from. So if it's a small portion of the Quran, like a juz, they divide the Quran into 30ths or into 60ths. If a person takes one of those portions and is memorizing from it, then it's permissible for him to touch it without wudu. And the same goes for the entire Quran. He mentions here that if it's a small portion that one is learning from, but it also the same goes for an entire copy of the Quran, according to the dominant opinion, if they're learning from it. Nor is it permissible to touch a learning slate with Quran on it without wudu, unless one is a student of that very slate or a teacher who is correcting something on it. So the lawh, or the learning slate, which is a tablet made of wood, where the people in the traditional Muslim cultures would write the lessons from the Quran and the other sciences on it and then memorize from it. That slate, the learning slate, the lawh, if it has Quran written on it, it has the same hukum of a mushaf. So if a person is not in a state of wudu, it is prohibited for him to touch it, unless he's a student of that very lawh, or a teacher who is correcting a person's writing, or looking at the lawh to make sure that there is no mistakes in the recitation or the rasm, the writing. So if a person's learning from the lawh, or learning from using a copy of the Quran to memorize from, then during the learning, while he is learning from it, while he is studying from it, or when he is carrying it to the place of learning or carrying it back, it's permissible for him to touch it without wudu. But once he's not studying it, once he's put it up for the day, then he has to have wudu if he wants to touch it. So if he puts his lawh on the leans it up against the wall, or puts his copy of the Quran on a table, and he's done studying, and then later on he wants to move it, he would not be able to move it unless he has wudu, because he is no longer learning from that particular mushaf or that particular lawh. وَالصَّبِيُّ فِي مَسْعِ الْقُرْآنِ كَالْكَبِيرِ وَالْإِثْمُ عَلَى مُنَاوِلِهِ لَهُ. The child concerning these rulings is the same as an adult, and the wrong action is upon the one who enabled him to have access to it. So the sabi, the male or the female child that has not reached the age of responsibility, the age of taklif, so he's not mukallaf, for him to touch the Quran, the rulings are the same. He has to have wudu to touch the mushaf. If a person wants to put a copy of the Quran in the hands of a child, they have to have wudu, unless they're a student. So if they're not a student and they do not have wudu, it's not permissible for a child to touch the Quran. But because there's no haram things, no prohibited things for the children, there's no sin on the child. Rather, the sin is upon the one who allowed that child to touch the Quran. So if a person was careless and did not put it on a high place, left it on an area where the child could get it, or actually handed it to the child and said, here, put this on the shelf, or here, put this back, then the sin goes to the person that allowed that child to touch the Quran without wudu. وَمَنْ صَلَّى بِغَيْرِ وُضُوءٍ عَامِدًا فَهُوَ كَافِرٌ وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. And anyone who prays intentionally without wudu is a disbeliever, and we seek refuge with Allah. Imam Al-Akhdari has mentioned this, but the dominant opinion is that if a person prays without wudu, it's haram and it makes the person a fasiq, a disobedient Muslim, but it is not kufr. It does not take that person out of the folds of Islam, because the dominant opinion of the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the people of the Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is that if a person commits a wrong action, as long as he knows that it's wrong, he's not saying it's halal, then he is not out of the folds of Islam. Some scholars in the commentary of this section of Akhdari said, though, what he means is that if a person prays without wudu, thinking that it's permissible to pray without wudu, then yes, he is a kafir. He is out of the folds of Islam. Because the principle is that anything that is well known to the Muslims, any of the well-known obligations, if a person rejects it, then it takes him out of the folds of Islam. So there are certain things, certain lessons that are known to every Muslim. The prohibition of alcohol, of adultery, of gambling, and so forth. And the obligation of fasting and praying and hajj and so forth. If somebody says that prayer is not incumbent, or doing wudu is not incumbent, or for a woman wearing hijab is not incumbent, these are things that would take them out of Islam, because now they are rejecting something that's well known. مَعْلُومٌ مِنَ الدِّينِ بِالضَّرُورَةِ. It's well known from the matters of the deen. So if a person does not pray and recognizes that it's a haram, he's a fasiq for leaving the prayer. But if he says, I do not pray and it's not an obligation, then he has left Islam, because now he is rejecting a lesson that was taken directly from the Quran. Allah has said to establish the prayer, and that order is an order of obligation. So it's as if he's rejecting something that Allah has said. Or if a woman refuses to wear hijab, and she knows that it's haram, then she's a fasiqah. She's a disobedient Muslimah. But if she says it's not incumbent for me to wear the hijab, then it's as if she's rejecting the ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered the women to cover themselves.